Well, Jim, speaking of things that have no natural transition from working or not working, A&E. Of course, another season of WWE Biography, which is, as it says at the end of the show, produced by WWE for A&E. And this week's episode was Jake the Snake Roberts.
A lot of initials there. For A&E by WWE. You know, I said that I like the A&E shows and the documentaries and the biographies and the things in general because we get to see the old footage, and that's so much fun. And boy, you see the people jumping up and down and screaming. You see the old rivalries and feuds you remember and the action and etc. It's always, except this one wasn't fun. Because you can kind of give it the heartwarming ending, which they did, but you can't make Jake's story fun, especially with everything that has been revealed about that story over the last several years. But I'll say that Jake he's worked on it for so long and he's told it so much now. He's figured out a way to tell it so dramatically. He's like an evil Wilford Brimley.
You know, not to take anything away from the story and everything else, and I think when he's just being asked questions and answering, it's one thing, but for me, I thought it was too performy at times. He knows the speech he's going to give.
Yeah, well, and that's what he's done. He's done great at it. He's gone from being a great wrestling promo to an incredible storyteller about his own life, and he has come up with the explanation for why he turned out like he did, and he's perfected it to where he can be a babyface to people, even after being in various ways, whether a parent or a father or a husband or an employee or a person, one of the most despicable people ever. But now he's turned it all around to where he can actually even talk about it and say what a prick he was, and other people will argue with him about, no, Jake, we love you. No, I was the worst human being in the world. And they'll argue with him.
I remember in 95 at Fan Week, something you said that Tommy Noe's mom said. She saw Jake on religious programming, because I believe Tommy and his mom are religious.
Yes.
And she said to Tommy, he always knows what to say. And I always thought that stayed with me. I still remember that quote. He always knows what to say.
And that's why his wrestling career was as successful as it was for the period of time it was. We'll talk about that. That's why, and a lot of people will tell you, any addict, you read the stories or you hear the talk from their families, they have to be manipulators. And Jake was one of the best one, either professionally or personally. And he can always spin a situation, and he's brilliant at it. And when you go back and you look at the compilation just of the interviews they showed here, because everybody, all the fans and everybody in the business, the thing they always talked about Jake was the promos, the interviews. He can talk because he can, and he could, and he did. And Jake was, I don't know, like we've talked about Honky Tonk Man, Wayne Ferris got by psychologically as a heel. He got away with doing the absolute least he could in the ring and got the most, response out of it. And some of it was, the over-the-top wackiness. Jake was kind of like an evil Honky Tonk Man. Jake was an excellent worker. But except for the DDT, the knee lift that he used as a babyface, and a short arm clothesline, what did Jake do? At a punch?
Nothing.
Jake go ahead.
I was just going to say, that's why if you ever see any of his opponents from back then interviewed, they all talk about how much they loved working with him. It was like a night off.
Yeah, night off, punches off, kicks off. No, I'm kidding. It was a night off because he did the bare minimum physically that he had to do to get by to tell the story in the ring. And I'm not knocking him. That's why I'm saying he was a fantastic worker, because everything that he did was meant to get the fucking reaction or opinion or whatever that he wanted, whether it was he did something physically or mentally or verbally or whatever. And that's, so he was kind of unique And when we go through and we'll talk about this, you look at the years that he actually was on top for the amount of time that he's been remembered, it's insane. But it was so memorable because he was different and he manipulated everybody with his promos, with his matches, with his behind the scenes, etc. He was very different. And that's what this show was. It's a 2-hour program, and close to half of it was more like the background music was like a horror movie, and it was talking about the dark side of his family and family relationships and family life. It wasn't a feel-good, wrestling documentary or bio and look at all this great action footage. It was this, horrible story that he is, again, become known for. And more of the family comments, honestly, than we've seen from anything so far. But it was like watching the Lifetime, documentary instead of a wrestling biography. I would have never known that he graduated high school with honors.
Not surprised. Smart guy.
And at the start of the program, I realized, that's right. Jake does have kids, because they interviewed his 2 sons, and then the daughter popped up. And I question marked. He's got kids. That's right. Shit. But then by the time the show's over, he's got 8 of them. 8.
8 is enough.
And only about half of them speak to him from what he says. So anyway, and Robin, his sister, is somewhat of a voice of reason from that family. And we got a lot of genuine comments from her. And, the early photos and etc. The stuff of Grizzly in action, would that have come from there looked like something there was from Mid-South, but some of that stuff looked like it may have come from Florida.
That's what I think. I think it all came from Florida.
But that's very rare to see footage of Grizzly in action. And, that's early on in this, because it was, had to be 30 minutes before he even started refereeing, the wrestling thing, because the grandmother said, I should have killed your father when I had the chance. And the whole trying to draw the family tree with Grizzly getting Jake's mother pregnant when she was the 12-year-old daughter of his girlfriend at the time. And then Robin and Sam Houston's mother was 14, but that was a different woman. And and then the molesting by the stepmother and everything. Again.
Although Robin said she didn't believe that part, actually, which I thought was interesting. They left that in the documentary.
She believed it happened, but she thought that it wasn't that Grizzly didn't know about it. It was that Grizzly was the one who was putting her up to doing it.
No, I thought Robin was saying that she didn't think her mother could actually abuse Jake.
No. She said she did that because Daddy wanted her to do it.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yes.
That's right.
So the point is, yes, it is a story, but boy, for the people thinking they're sitting down for the first time I'll just watch the life story of this great wrestler that I liked when I was a kid. Oh boy, howdy. So, the rookie pictures, and there was no really reflection on how long he trained, who trained him, or who he trained with. Grizzly shamed him over his first match. I saw him in 1977, and he was the shits, just so you know. But they had clips from Calgary and Crockett where he was being used by the time he went to Mid-Atlantic. So that they were juxtaposing some of the Mid-Atlantic footage with when he was still the shits and paying his dues, but by that point he was a pushed babyface. But nevertheless, boy, did you see him against JYD in Calgary, and what was that, would that have been 78? Both of them were in shape.
Yeah, but he didn't know how to do a sleeper.
Well, no, but they looked great.
Isn't that where JYD taught him about steroids and Jake taught JYD about speed?
cocaine.
Yeah.
he told the DDT story again that the grappler tripped him. I don't believe that. I never have believed that story.
Black Gordman was doing it, right?
Well, yeah, but besides that, it's not that big of a stretch. But nevertheless, it was so protected. And that's what got it, not only because Jake was the best one to ever do it. Most of the guys landed flat on their face instead of flipping over like became the fashion. And it looked like a impact of a dog chasing a parked car, And also, do you know kids have not known that DDT was the name of a pesticide?
It's been gone a long time.
But, well, so has goddamn Babe Ruth, and I've heard of him.
Well, more people talk about him every year than DDT.
DDT was fucking over, boy. It was controversial. That was bad shit. But a lot of people now these days don't know it was a pesticide, but that's what the DDT was named after. And then Vince calls Jake and pitches him the gimmick. And the gimmick was, the boys started calling Jake the Snake before that was his fucking nickname. But Vince wanted to go all the way with it, with the snake boots and the whole 9 yards. And again, that run and that place was perfect for Jake at the time. Yes, he excelled in Mid-South wrestling, but not because of the athleticism, because of the promo and the psychology. In the WWF at that point in time, where Vince is looking at making everybody a television personality and exploiting everybody's speaking ability and the different personality-based gimmicks instead of employment-based gimmicks, that Jake was perfect for that environment. And I think that's why he, again, his promos, his attitude, and his inflection, and just the look in the eyes and the meaning it, that's what got him over there, and that was the perfect place to talk yourself over in the 80s in the WWF. And he says he didn't want a DDT Steamboat on the floor. Well, he didn't not want to bad enough to loosen up on him, did he?
That holds up. That's still one of the most brutal things you could hear. Steamboat says it sounded like a bomb or a grenade going off in my head. That's what it sounds like. You could hear the thud.
Yeah, well, and part of that, honestly, was Jake hitting the ground too. But see, the thing is, a lot of guys, the idea was that obviously he would give Ricky Steamboat his finish on the concrete floor, and that would be more heinous, like when Gordy pile drove DiBiase on the concrete floor in the TBS studio instead of in the ring. We talked about that few fucking however long ago, few weeks or whatever. But Jake was, he didn't want to do it because he said he would kill him. But once they determined that they were going to do it, the priority was that the DDT looked good and not that Steamboat did not get fucking killed. So that's what tickled me about it, because, you know, it was like Jake said, okay, I'll kill him. Well, we got to do it. Okay. And Steamboat says, I can protect myself. Well, then you also, it's incumbent upon you to fucking kind of take care of the guy because it's on the floor instead of the ring. But Jake just said, okay, and gave him the goddamn DDT. So he wasn't worried about Steamboat enough to make his hold look bad, is what I'm trying to. It's because the hold was over.
Hey, what do you think of the Jake Roberts DDT where the guy goes flat down versus the Michael Hayes DDT? Other people did it too, where it's more of a rolling DDT.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. That's just a low altitude fucking snap suplex at that point. It didn't have the appeal. And if you noticed, not only would Jake hook the fucking face lock, and he was so tall and had the long legs and the long arms, right as he was going to drop the guy, he'd raise his right arm and bring it down and slap the guy on the back like he was putting every bit of momentum behind the guy's sudden descent as he could. And it was quick and it snapped off like that. That's what the key was. When, again, guys started taking fancy bumps where they stood up on their head like a fence post and then bounced back up to their feet and twirled around and fucking skipped, or the rolling bumps or the off the ropes or what. just fucked the whole thing up.
It is interesting, too. He invents it in his eyes, but he popularizes it. He names it. And that name sticks with the move no matter who does it. Even when Jake was at his peak as being a star, Michael Hayes, Arn Anderson, whoever did it, was called the DDT. Today, when people do it as a transition move and kick out of it, it's still called the DDT. It's one of the last moves that kept its name no matter who was doing it.
That's because it was over. It was, at that time, it was one of the most over moves in the business. And it was protected because Jake was smart enough to know that just for the sake of having a good match, or God forbid, getting a baby face over, because Jake didn't care about getting anybody over when it came to prostituting his move. If you got hit with it, you got beat with it. Had the highest winning percentage of anything in wrestling probably at the time. So that's why it was over. It's not hard to figure out.
That's why Hogan wouldn't work with him, because the fans were going to chant for DDT.
Yeah. And guess what? If Jake gave him the DDT, it was going to be because he was going to pin him. Maybe if they'd have said, Jake, you'll be the main event with Hogan at WrestleMania and you'll make 300, 400 grand or whatever, he's all right. But not until then. But anyway, and at that point, speaking of which, with Undertaker, Undertaker takes the DDT and sits up. And then tombstones Jake, and then Jake is beaten at WrestleMania, and Jake is done in the WWF, 1992.
Only time he ever comes out without the snake.
And the only time, did anybody ever survive the DDT? Ever before that?
I can't think of anyone.
I don't think, and they definitely didn't sit up, and that's what.
I can't think of anyone ever kicking out of Jake's DDT.
Yeah,
actually.
So that's why the Undertaker, that helped him a little bit more, and at the same time, that the reason why it was done was because he was done. And they glossed over the reason, the specific reasons with specificity, but Jake said, I went off the deep end, and I was out of control for the next 20 years. And that's, pretty much, I can't even remember the specific. Did he flunk a test? Did he just get heat? Why did they part ways with Jake in 92? It was his behavior, but I can't remember what the exact situation.
He was partying, because I think that led into Road Warrior Hawk's issues, actually, that came to a head later that year in SummerSlam. But Jake has told the story before. I know he says it about when he came back in 96. But he has said before that he thought he was going to be on the booking team, or whatever you want to call it, in 92, and that Vince decided not to do that. And because of that, Jake decided to party for the next several years.
Take all the drugs in Colombia.
Yeah. And he still, that's the thing though, they didn't point out that, Jake Roberts left WWF and then he came back in 96. He was still making money. He worked for WCW. But he was doing all those AAA shows where he was the biggest heel in Mexico.
Yeah.
And he worked for Smoky Mountain Wrestling.
By the way, making a ton of money in cash in Mexico for a drug addict, is that a bad lifestyle? But let's go back a minute. He is gone from WWF in 92 after WrestleMania, but that's when he went to WCW. Because who was there? Bill Watts.
Grizzly, if you're going to say it.
Well, but Grizzly, he wasn't the person hiring people. At the time, Bill Watts had success with Jake in Mid-South. And I'm pretty sure, thought, well, I did it before. I'm the team captain, the football captain, or the fucking coach. I can control my team. I can control Jake. You can see where they would have made that move. And also, that move didn't even last a fucking year, did it? Did he make a year?
It didn't last 4 months.
That's right. And then that's when he started going to Mexico, where he was the top heel for AAA. And that's where I foolishly said, well, he just lives 200 miles down the road in Atlanta. And 2 years ago, he was in the main event at WrestleMania. Can Jake the Snake Roberts draw me any money if we let him talk on TV and work in our buildings? And the answer to that was, we'll never fucking find out, because it didn't last that long. He made 3 shows, but here's the thing. I can tell you from firsthand experience, when I called Jake on the phone, when I drove down to his house in Atlanta to see him and to shoot promos and talk to him and his lovely wife, Cheryl, at the time, and he was telling me, oh, I've straightened up, I'm trying to make some amends, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, you'll find me fair and honor and all this stuff. This was like 6 months after his daughter had just said that when she moved to Atlanta to spend time with him, that she drove the whole way from Texas to Georgia because he was smoking crack the whole way in the car with his daughter. And that was 6 months before he's telling me, oh, I've straightened up and I got blah, blah, blah.
I didn't realize that was the same daughter from the Blaustein film until the very end, and they showed the old clips. I didn't put 2 and 2 together. It was the same daughter.
So, but at that point, besides the WWF run 96-97, which we'll talk about in a second, think about this. Jake Roberts, Jake the Snake, still to this day one of the most remembered stars. And you would think, oh, yeah, he's one of those guys who was around forever. His WWE run lasted 6 years. He had been a pro at that point for about 17 years, but honestly, let's go with starting with Crockett in 81. His run as a pushed performer lasted 1981 to 1993 out of WCW, then, like I said, with AAA and Smoky Mountain. And apparently a lot of 95 somewhere on Uranus. And then one more year in the WWF, he was done. It has been almost 30 years, 27 years since, 26 years now since Vince, right? Or since Jake, since that last run with Vince, since he was on a national television promotion, and he, by his own admission, spent the next 20 years as a drunk asshole on the indies. So to be remembered for that period of time that much, he accomplished something despite his best efforts not to. And I felt sorry a lot of times for his daughter and his sons and the normal people that got caught up in all of this. But also, if you go back and look, and I'm just making an observation, the 1996 return, where he was giving glory to God and supposedly, according to Peter Rosenberg, who should know he was there, right, when he was 12 years old or whatever. He really was born again. He had a new personality. He was trying to make amends. Bullshit. At that time, he was 40 and looked 60. The run in the ring was a disaster because he was fat and slow, and the guys had passed him in the ring at that time. And the physical part was never the greatest part of his game anyway. But again, at that point, that was what he sold Vince, was the story that, oh, I have found God and I'm trying to, do good or whatever. And he wanted to be on the creative team. And we've talked about this before, which lasted a period of weeks. And when the excuses started, we believed them, because who would have thought that this guy would fuck up again this quick, right? But how could every member of his family be sick every week? The sick at the start of the week where he couldn't fly to Connecticut, and sick at the end of the week where he had to go home early. But with the interaction with Steve Austin, which they made the point of, was his inadvertent and last great contribution to what was going on at that time in the WWF. But we talk on the booking committee, Jake blamed, the quote was, being around other wrestlers, even while being a Christian, was just too much for his demons. That's why he was riding with guys that I'm pretty sure at least one of them had probably never even laid his eyes on crack, much less used it. And while he was on the creative team, Jake was asking these middle card guys that he was bumming a ride with because he didn't have a driver's license to go to the fucking crack house on the way to Madison Square Garden. Before the show, even.
Not even after the show, before the show.
Not even after the night. Couldn't even wait for the crack till after the show. Had to have the... And then the footage, the Heroes of Wrestling pay-per-view I've seen before, but some of the other stuff of him just being drunk and slobbering on independent shows, I hadn't seen all of that. And that was... And I mean, he admits it. You know, he was a bad parent and a rotten fucking person. But like I said at the top, the rotten thing is you can never tell with Jake, is it real or is it Memorex? Is it genuine or prepared for a purpose?
You know, the daughter at the end said something interesting about how, you know, you said there's 8 kids. 4 will talk to Jake and 4 won't. 4 think he's changed or he's a different person. 4, for whatever reason, don't. And I think that's kind of a divide in wrestling, too. You know, DDP did a lot to rejuvenate the image of Jake Roberts, let alone whatever he did on a personal level in terms of health and everything else. But there are people who still say Jake's still the same guy. He's still a jerk. He's still a bad person. There's someone I know in wrestling who I have a lot of respect for who typically looks on the brighter side of things. And he wrote to me one time after hearing something we said about Jake on the show, he's not a good person. So I think that was interesting because they left that in. And they left different things in that at times, you know, it wasn't just a rosy picture of Jake. I mean, at the end when he's fishing on the boat with his kids, it kind of does present that. But the point is, for everyone that thinks Jake is a different person, there's probably equally an amount of people that think it's not the abuse, it's not Grizzly, it's not the drugs, it's not anything. It's his mentality. Whatever it is, even when things are going well, if Jake could screw someone over, he will. And personally, I know multiple people, including someone on the line right now, that Jake is screwed over in his lifetime. And at a certain point, like I said, you can't just blame drugs and everything. It's the mentality of the person. It's the person choosing to do something and knowing they could talk their way out of it. So I'm happy he's in a better place now, but it doesn't really change the way I see Jake as a person. Phenomenal professional wrestler, especially mentally.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. To me, it pretends like it's now all over. And he's, I don't know, what do you think? I'm babbling.
Yeah, well, I think back to what Aunt Lola used to say. Everything you do gets blamed right on you. That was a very profound statement.
Yeah, we'll see if anyone writes a song about that. Let me ask you,
wrote a song about it. Like to hear it. Here it goes.
One last question, just because whenever we talk about this stuff, this comes up. And we just reviewed the Dark Side Grizzly Smith episode. Was that last year? I forget. I think it was last year.
Yeah.
People say, how did anyone not know? How did the people in Mid-South not know? Remember, Baby Doll was on Dark Side and said, I sat in the car looking for it, and I didn't see it.
Yeah.
Jerry Gray was on 605 once talking about being in the car with Grizzly, who, again, number 2 guy in the promotion. Jerry was working undercard. The guy says, you want to ride with me? You say, yes. There's a girl there. Didn't see anything. Didn't see anything. In fact, it was almost like he was the beloved uncle or something. So you know,
they went into more detail on, it was either the Dark Side episode or another one of these documentaries that has plumbed the depths of Grizzly.
But my question,
it's the same thing with Jake. They are manipulators, and they could say things to make you believe that any suspicion you had was something was wrong with you.
But to the people today that say there's no way anyone who was working for Mid-South Wrestling, there's no way that any of those wrestlers or anyone there didn't know this guy was a child molester. You were there. I mean, what do you say?
Again, no, nobody. I mean, it was joked about because he was always Grizzly. We're talking too many pronouns, pal. Grizzly would always be around the groups of young girl fans But it was only when the car pulled up, he knew all of their names, right? And he got in, he waved and blah, blah, blah. But this also was the 80s when I was there. Grizzly had been, in his 50s. And whatever he had done previously, he had apparently slowed down on it. And the guys made jokes because he was always around, but nothing happened. Nobody said something was happening. And when they had done the documentaries that we talked about, they went back and talked about how the Grizzly didn't share his personal life, that Gainesville, Texas is way out from where other goddamn people in the wrestling business lived. He didn't bring the wife on the road so they could see that the wife was fucking 16 years old or whatever. There's no cell phones, social media, no fucking Facebook. A lot of people lived double lives back then. And, people were shocked to find out what had been going on. So, and also, Jesus H. Christ, when you're a wrestler from anywhere of any experience level and you come in and one of the guys that's, working for the promotion that's in the office is telling you to do shit. Yeah, show up here at 7:00 and do that. You don't do a goddamn background check on them. But again, a lot of people, this story was not even known in wrestling back in those days. Now, every goddamn, everybody in the world knows it, and they think that everybody always has.
I don't think anyone knew the story of Jake's conception until Beyond the Mat, or is it Beyond? Yeah, Beyond the Mat.
Beyond the Mat was the first one. Yeah, that was what, 20 years ago. So that was the first time that even came up. And then nobody had gone to interview the family members. And Robin, at one point in time, part of her healing and going through all of that was being able to actually talk about it and discuss it and, get over it and everything. So wasn't something they were all going, oh, by the way, did you hear what Grizz did last week? Fuck. I think people sometimes they confuse history with what people knew at the time. If everybody knew history at the time it was happening, then nobody'd ever lose a fucking war.
Do you think they should have mentioned that he's working for AEW?
Well, that's the last thing I was going to fucking laugh at, because they said everything else in this documentary, and the good, the bad, and the ugly. They're talking about his father being a pedophiliac that fucking his own mother wanted to kill, but they won't mention AEW. And Jake, actually, I'm so grateful to the WWE for putting this piece out there so folks can know how I am now, since I'm living a life of complete obscurity because I work for a promotion that has national television. So yeah, pedophilia, rape, incest, drug addiction, alcohol, making a mess of your life and your kids' lives, that's fine, but don't mention AEW.
Well, that was the A&E, not AEW, but the A&E biography of Jake the Snake Roberts, of course, produced by WWE for A&E. And some may say that's false advertising. I think I'm watching A&E biography, and it's produced by WWE. That doesn't seem right. That's not the way they did biography back in the day. I think I may want to sue.
Are you talking about a bait and switch type of situation?
A bait and switch type of situation.
I thought you might be talking about, well, if anybody ever wanted to do a documentary on me like this, where they made Jake Roberts' story even more uplifting than Randy Savage's because they just wanted to fuck with him last season. Well, either way, if you need to sue somebody, then I know who that you should call in order to sue.
Call Stephen P. If you need to sue. An outlaw mug good show or two. Skills to the rest.
And I'll tell you what, if you have heard about some horrible goings on down in the state of Louisiana, down in Cajun country, Louisiana, as we used to call it when the people there wanted to kill us, well, it's not bad weather. It's not that big, giant, high pressure or low pressure. It's not a hurricane blowing through. No, it is Hurricane Stephen is who it is. It's Stephen P. New and the folks at newlawoffice.com. Phone number 888-692-8084. They have been shaking things up down in the state of Louisiana, where that energy company, Entergy, boy, how original, has basically screwed almost 500,000 people in the state of Louisiana, 350,000 residential customers, 17,000 business customers. During that last bout with the Hurricane Ida, the whole grid collapsed, all the towers, everything was down. These people were without power from 1 to 3 weeks. There were people, their businesses were ruined, their lives were inconvenienced, their lives were put at risk, all because of the greediness and the avariciousness of these Entergy people who not only did not reinforce their towers the way they were supposed to withstand the hurricane winds, the way they told the government they were going to, but instead they gave all the money to their big wigs. And the guy that's just apparently left that used to be running this company, he is now slinking out in shame. Well, they gave him $43 million worth of this stock on the way out. And you just know Stephen P. New is going to be doing something about that, not to mention the mass litigation panel. That just sounds scary. That's a mass litigation panel. That sounds like somebody that decides whether you will live or get set fire to. And that right now is actively underway in West Virginia against 75 different defendants on behalf of the opioid-addicted babies. A bunch of people had their hands in this. Stephen P. New's going after all of them. And they're part of a multi-district litigation against the consulting company McKinsey in San Francisco. You'll recall that I mentioned them last week. They're the ones that put out that sexual report in the 70s, screwed everybody's heads up. And they're also New Law Office filing cases in New York, Ohio, Tennessee, and it's either Los Angeles or Louisiana on behalf of the little addicted babies in the very near future. So if you would like to have a man like this representing you, a man who fights for babies and for electrical power and clean milk and all the other good things that people fight for, then you want to call Stephen P. New at newlawoffice.com, 888-692-8084, because much as he represents me, he can represent thee. And much as he represents you, he can represent you too. Stephen P. New.